7 ways to help with anxiety. Hi, I'm Chris. I help people with anxiety, agoraphobia, and panic attacks to really be in control in all circumstances and to enjoy life. Knowing how anxiety works can help you to better support loved ones without inadvertently making their anxiety worse. Your loved ones may feel so fearful that they avoid taking action or act in ways that are inconsiderate or that increases your own anxiety. This might look like a boyfriend constantly putting off important tasks or discussions, a friend complaining about being lonely but refusing to date, or a boss always focusing on what could go wrong, making everybody miserable. It's difficult to witness anxiety in somebody you know, and it's even harder when their anxiety triggers yours. But what could you do to help anxious people? First, you need to understand that anxiety is a human feature, not a flaw. Most of us get anxious from time to time because it's generally useful emotion that helps us to see potential threats, make us concerned with social rejection, and keep us on alert to being deceived. While being anxiety prone might seem like a fault, it's actually helpful to have some people in our population who are more cautious and who frequently think about what could go wrong. However, sometimes people get into a pattern of coping with anxiety that causes it to snowball. They overthink, avoid whatever triggers the anxiety, and use compensatory strategies like being extremely perfectionist to avoid feeling like an imposter at work. They decrease the anxiety temporarily but increase it over the long term. These coping strategies can also push people away, people like you. So number 1, understand differences in how anxiety manifests. Because of evolution, we are wired to respond to fear by either fight or flight or freeze. For different people, one of these responses will typically dominate. For instance, a spouse tends to freeze and will bury her head in the sand rather than deal with things that make her feel stressed and panicky. You tend to move towards fighting and will become irritable, excessively perfectionistic, or dogmatic if you feel stressed. When you understand that anxiety is designed to put us into a mode of threat sensitivity, it's easier to understand somebody who is feeling scared or stressed and acting out by being irritable or defensive, or to find compassion for them by paying attention to how anxiety manifests in the person you care about. You can learn their patterns and be in a better position to help. Number 2, match your support to their preferences and attachment style. It's best to ask someone what type of support they prefer rather than guess. However, we know from research that people who have an avoidance attachment style, typically those who've experienced rejecting caregiving or relationships in the past, are likely to respond best to strong displays of concrete, practical support. That could include helping anxious people break tasks down into manageable steps, or talking through specific options for how to deal with a difficult situation. Like how to respond to an angry email, but still acknowledging their autonomy and independence while doing so. Other people are more likely to prefer emotional support, especially those who are securely attached or who have a preoccupied attachment style due to a fear of being abandoned or of their emotions being overwhelming to others. Folks like this respond well to statements emphasizing that they are part of a tight team, for example, their supporter. Saying this is tough, but we love each other and we'll make it through it together. Of course, these are generalizations, and you need to tailor your support by observing what works in your particular situation. But when you have a very close relationship with somebody, You can offer support based on intimately understanding your loved one's anxiety patterns. 3. Find ways to make use of any insight they have into their anxiety. If your loved ones have insight into their anxiety, you can help them spot when their anxiety-driven patterns are occurring. You find it helpful when your spouse notices that you are expressing your anxiety about work by being irritable or by being too fussy. Because you know each other's patterns so well and have a trusting relationship, you can point out to each other's habits. Not that this is always met with grace, but the message sinks in anyway. If you are going to do this, it's a good idea to have their permission first. Keep in mind that people who have insight into their anxiety often still feel compelled to give in to their anxious thoughts. For instance, a person with health anxiety might logically know that going to the doctor every week for multiple tests is unnecessary. But they can't help themselves. If your loved ones lacks insight into their anxiety or has trouble managing compulsions, it's probably best to encourage them to see a therapist who specializes in treatment of anxiety. 4. Help someone who is anxious to temper their thinking. You'll be more useful support person if you educate yourself about the models of anxiety, which you can do by reading or attending a therapy session with your loved one. But in lieu of that, you might try using some techniques that can be helpful to people suffering from anxiety. Typically, anxious people have a natural bias toward thinking about the worst case scenarios. To help them get some perspective on that, you can use a technique where you ask them to consider 3 questions. What's the worst that could happen? What is the best that could happen? What's most realistic or likely? So if your loved one is anxious that they were supposed to hear from their parents hours ago but haven't, you can suggest they consider the worst, best, and most likely explanation for the lack of contact. Take care not to overly reassure your loved ones that their fears won't come to pass. It's more useful to emphasize their coping ability. For example, if they are worried about having a panic attack on a plane, you could say, that would be extremely unpleasant and scary, but you'll deal with it. And if your loved one is feeling anxious that someone else is angry with them or disappointed in them, it's often useful to remind them that you can only ever choose your own actions and not completely control other people's responses. 5. Offer support, but don't take over. Avoidance is a core feature of anxiety, so sometimes we may feel pulled to help out by doing things for our avoidant loved ones and inadvertently feed their avoidance. For instance, if your anxious roommate finds making phone calls incredibly stressful and you end up doing this for them, they never push through their avoidance. A good general principle to keep in mind is that support means helping someone to help themselves, not doing things for them, which includes virtually anything that stops short of actually doing it yourself. For example, you might offer to attend a first therapy session with your loved one if they set up the appointment, or if they are not sure how to choose a therapist, you might brainstorm ways of doing that, but let them choose. That's the important thing. An exception might be when somebody's anxiety is accompanied by severe depression. If they can't get themselves out of bed, they may be so shut down that they temporarily need people to do whatever is needed to help them stay alive. Also, sometimes loved ones are so gripped by an anxiety disorder that they are in pure survival mode and need more hands-on help to get things done. In less extreme circumstances, however, it's best to offer support without taking over or overdoing the reassurance. 6. If someone has a more serious anxiety problem, avoid stigmatizing them. What can we do for folks with more serious issues? People experiencing things like panic disorders, depression, mixed with anxiety, post-traumatic stress, or obsessional thinking, including thoughts related to eating disorders, may fear that they are literally going crazy. Helping them may feel beyond your ability. You can still be supportive in many ways. When someone is experiencing significant anxiety, it's helpful to reassure them that your overall perception of them hasn't changed. You are still the same person. They are still suffering a temporary problem situation that has become out of control. They are not broken, and who they are hasn't changed. To the extent possible, you can help the person stay connected to positive aspects of their identity by participating in or encouraging their interests and hobbies. Sometimes, individuals who have chronic anxiety problems aren't interested in changing. For example, you might be friends with someone who has agoraphobia or an eating disorder, but their condition is long-term and stable. In these cases, you can be accepting of that person so that they don't feel isolated. Being matter-of-fact about their limitations without exceedingly shaming them or insisting they should pursue becoming normal is often the best strategy. 7. Take care of yourself too. Recognizing that your goal is to help and not cure the person or relieve them from their anxiety. Taking too much responsibility is actually a symptom of anxiety. So make sure you are not falling into that trap yourself. Keep in mind that your support doesn't need to be directly focused on anxiety. For example, exercise is extremely helpful for anxiety. So perhaps you could simply offer to go for a walk or attend a yoga class together. It's also fine to put some limitations on your support. A 20-minute de-stressing conversation while taking a walk is far more likely to be useful and less exhausting than a 2-hour marathon discussion. Helping somebody with anxiety isn't always easy, and you may feel like you are getting it wrong. But if you remind yourself that you and your loved ones are both doing your best, it can help to keep things in perspective. It's important to remain compassionate and, as the saying goes, to put on your own oxygen mask first. That way you are clearer ahead for figuring out what's going on with your anxious loved one and how you can be truly of help. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Chris, and I help people with anxiety, agoraphobia and panic attacks to be in control of all situations. And thank you for listening, and have a nice day.